Thank you for joining, everyone. We're delighted to welcome you to our fifth in the series on how to do more with your budget. And this webinar is on email marketing, creating compelling campaigns that convert. So I'd like to introduce you to myself, Lindsay Dier. I'm Head of Client Services at Generate UK, and I'm joined by Tracy-Ann Lee, who's the Marketing and Events Manager. For those who haven't attended one of our webinars before, here's just a brief summary about Generate UK. We're founded in 2008 as a full-service marketing agency, and we have multiple qualifications, including accredited Google Partners, Prince 2 qualified, we're 25th in the WireHive 100 League table, and we're really proud to be the only UK agency to be awarded the Customer Service Excellence Accreditation. To obtain this award, our customers and clients have to be proven to be at the heart of everything we do, and we're very business-centric in our approach to focus on delivering solutions that achieve their business goals, and that is part of what we showcase as within that accreditation. We're industry agnostic, so you can see from the logos on the right on your screen, here's a few of our clients, and they vary from professional services, retail, IT, technology, and public sector. And we believe that marketing processes can translate across all industries, so we don't commit to just one. So today we're going to go through the following. So why email marketing is as important now as it's ever been, the best practices for a successful campaign, how to create a nurture sequence that converts, as ultimately that's what you want to be doing, converting your prospects, and also the benefits of email marketing automation for those who have sort of mastered the fundamentals and ready for the next step. So the way this is going to work is we're going to go through the webinar, and then at the end we'll have some opportunity for anyone to ask questions. So if you're unsure of anything we cover, just use the Q&A tab that you should be able to see on the left of your screen, and we'll see the questions, and at the end we can address those. So I'm going to pass over to my colleague Tracy-Ann now, who's going to talk about the why email is important and set the scene.
Morning, everybody, and welcome to you today. There'll be a couple of polls going through this webinar, so please make sure that you actually answer them all, and we'll use these results as part of the webinar. So the first poll should be coming up on your screen now, and it is, how did you hear about this webinar? Okay, great. So we'll go through these answers later on, and I'll explain all why. So the importance of email. There are many types of emails to do with B2B and B2C. I could go on, and I could actually create our own webinar just based on the types of emails, but I'm not going to today. So we're just going to focus on three main ones: lead nurturing, promotional, and welcome and reminders. So as we all know, we're currently going through lockdown. It's really uncertain times. As you know, shops closed down back in March, which meant that people had to resort to shopping online. So what does this mean for email? Well, it meant that with emails, that's how we were getting most of our promotions and for our services and our goods to actually buy them. So it meant that email was an extremely effective way to encourage consumers to buy, and it means that it's still effective for B2B too. So if we look at actual stats that were taken from OmniSend data, you can see that pre-COVID, which is January to the end of February, beginning of March, there was just over an increase from 2019 to 2020 by just over 2%. So it meant that year on year, email open rates were still increasing. But as you can see, post-COVID, so from lockdown period, from March onwards, there was a huge increase by just over 31% of open rates. So that means that because of the new way of working from home, many people were more inclined to opening emails because, let's face it, no one's in the office anymore, so they're not distracted by taking any calls on their phones, so they're actually more open to opening emails. So what does that mean for then the conversion rates? So as we can see on the screen, back in 2019, there wasn't as much of an increase as there is now. So pre-COVID, again, an increase of just over 11%, but actually during lockdown, there was an increase of just over 22%. So it's had a massive effect. And if you think about it, at the beginning of lockdown, so we saw those open increases for the open rates. And this obviously led to more clicks. So that in turn led to higher amounts of conversions. So if you think about it, businesses and consumers were more inclined to convert via email because if there are now alternative solutions. We all use Zoom, we all use Microsoft Teams, and they're predominantly online solutions. So you can see that post-COVID-19, this has become a massive thing for email. And it means that email is now one of the main sources of communication back in April. And it is still the case now, even if some businesses are starting to go back into the office. So what do these stats actually mean for business? Well, it means that email marketing was a trusted go-to resource for consumers and businesses, and clearly it still is. The businesses have had to think about how they target their audience and make sure they are offering the most relevant and best solutions. So as a result, the messaging has had to be more effective, which leads to increased opens and increased conversion rates. So if we go back to the poll, I'm just going to show the results of what actually was shown on How Did You Hear About This webinar. And as you can see, if you can all see this on your screen, 56% of you who voted heard about this webinar via email. Now I can tell you that those who registered are pretty much about 85% of you actually heard through email, because obviously we've got the statistics for this. So you can see that email is one of the strongest ways of conversing, no matter what type of email it is. I'm gonna go on to the next poll now, which is, do you use marketing automation? And again, we'll go through these results at the end and you'll understand why. So do you use marketing automation at the moment? Okay, so we'll go through the benefits of marketing automation now, and I'll just hand over to Lindsay, who will go through that now.
So before we get to marketing automation, I just want to go through the best practices for a successful email campaign. And before diving into these elements, including do's and don'ts, which we'll come on to shortly, I want to impress upon you the importance of understanding your audience before you begin this process, because ultimately knowing who you're targeting is going to impact how you encourage them to fulfill the objective you want to achieve via email. And that's going to always begin with your subject line. So the subject line is really important anyway, because it's important for open rates. It's probably the only thing that your recipient is going to see to actually lead them onto the email. So it needs to encourage them to click through, and when they have done that, then they'll be able to go through your core messaging, which you'll put in the body of text. So here we say put your main purpose, because this is what's going to lead to the conversion that you want. So it's your opportunity to put in the offer, the solution, if it's an educational piece, whatever's most relevant to result in the action that you want. So for every email, you should consider what the purpose is before it gets sent. If you don't have a purpose, then you might want to rethink why you're sending email in the first place. And ideally, these should align with your business goals, because any marketing that you do should be directed to help achieve the business what you want to achieve. The types of email you can have is HTML or plain text, which Tracy-Ann's going to talk about in more detail shortly. But this is how the email looks to the user. So is it more visual? Is it more text-based? And that decision will be influenced by the audience once again. So A/B testing is really important in any marketing. You should always be testing what you're doing and making sure that you're offering lots of monitoring the performance so you can make improvements on a continual basis. And it's suffice to say that email is no exception to this rule. We're going to actually talk about testing separately because it's quite an important part of this. Data is definitely really important because the better the quality of the data is going to impact the success of the campaign completely. Obviously, we would recommend having compliant data because that's come into place in 2018 with the GDPR regulation, and reporting is also really important. So accurate tracking measures should be put in place when you're doing any email campaign so that you can measure what's working and what's not for the rest of the email campaigns that you do in the future. So things that you should be doing. So the subject line, this is to get people's attention. So if it's relevant to your audience, you might want to consider using emojis, for example. We always say use a soft future verb. So read more, check this out, this is an offer. Get people interested in clicking through to the email. If you fail at this stage, then no one actually gets to the email. So it's sort of stopped you before you've begun. Staying focused on your call to action. So here, what are you actually trying to achieve? You want to keep that point in mind when you're creating the email so that when it goes into people's inboxes, that's a very clear message. Personalization can be really effective for both B2B and B2C, and it can be implemented in different ways. So it might be that you introduce the person's name or their job function or their company that they work for, because the more personalized you can get, the more tailored the body of the copy in the email is. So it's going to be more relevant to the recipient. So to give you an example of that, if it's a B2C business, then you might have someone who's purchased from your company before, and you might send them an email of products they might be interested in based on their previous purchase history. Hopefully that's going to be tailored to what they're actually looking at, so it's going to be more relevant and they're more likely to buy again. Similarly, you might have a B2B business, and if you understand who the audience is and what their business challenges are, you can use that within the messaging, and the email will be more likely to resonate with who they are and what they want to see. So making sure the next step post your call to action click is worthwhile. This is a sort of two-phase approach. You want to give them a good enough reason to follow through with that call to action. And once they've done that, you want to make sure the rest of the user journey is seamless and allows it to happen effectively. So whatever that purpose is that you're trying to get them to do, you want them to be able to do it easily without sort of issues. UTM tracking. Again, most email software has UTM tracking set up automatically. So you can see where they've clicked or what interaction they take and how effective your email is actually being. But it's good to sort of check this with your analytics and make sure it's all set up so you can properly analyze that journey. And then, of course, we come on to testing. So A/B testing is another way of saying split testing. This is where you might send a couple of options, so option A or B, or even more, C, D, E, to a sample of the data list that you're going to send the rest of the email to. And based on the performance of what works best or what gets the most opens or generates the most clicks, for example, what better interaction you get, you then use that option. So say option A was most successful and send that to the rest of the database. Something we recommend with testing is not to do every single different component all at once, because you won't necessarily be able to track which element is being most effective because you're testing too many things at the same time. So when you do your testing, it will probably be over a longer period of time, and you'll want to do it in stages. So first sort of subject line might be the first thing you look at, and then body of the email. So on the screen, you'll see some different areas that you can test. So internal testing, again, most email software allows you to send an inbox test to yourself. This is when you receive the email that you're planning on sending to the rest of the data, and you can make sure it looks how you expect it to, check it for formatting and spelling. Is it how you expect it to be seen? And if not, you can make the fixes before you send it to the rest of the data. The subject line. So we sort of touched on this briefly before. You might want to change the wording, see what's resonating more. If it's the right audience, you might use emojis. The body of the email. So this is anything within that email that you're sending. So it can be images, it can be messaging on the images, it can be links or at the anchor text leading to links. It can be the messaging and how you phrase things. Anything is sort of up for changing and making tweaks to see what's working more effectively. The day of the week, the time of day, they always have a different sort of impact. And of course, the audience. So the reason we put audience here is because what might work for, say, one segment of your data might not work for another. So it's not necessarily one size fits all, but it could be based on the different vertical. They respond differently to how you present that email. So make sure you test what works, make a note, and that might change based on audience. So things to avoid: spammy, free, or other things within the subject line and in the email, because it's probably going to be put in your junk if you receive an email like that. I'm sure if you look at your junk mail, you'll have a lot which have these sort of spammy subject lines, and your email clients just filtered them through, and so no one's actually going to see your email. No or multiple calls to actions, because that's really confusing. So I've received emails in the past where I read it and I'm not actually sure what action I'm supposed to take from that. So is that because they don't have anything which is specific, or is it because there's too much? That's going to lead to confusion, and then ultimately your recipient is going to kind of not do anything. So this is where we go back to make sure you know what the point and purpose of your email is, and make sure that's focused and fixed when you're sending it. Overindulging HTML. So for visual ones, you might have, say, 95% images. Well, when it gets sent through to people's emails, they might have a preview, but the preview only shows 10%, and then it doesn't load properly, or you're going to have problems with it actually being delivered correctly, and then people aren't going to see your messaging. So don't do too much if it's avoidable. And on the sort of other side of the coin, don't do too much copy. So no one wants to read a blog post when they open their email. Again, that sort of suggests that you're not being succinct as to what you're trying to achieve. And it would be too much for people to look at, and they won't look at it at all. Another sort of more archaic practice is sending to all and hoping it sticks. So this is more sort of traditional marketing, where you cast the net wide and you hope some people are going to sort of get some traction with that. These days, we would recommend not using this method because, again, personalization works much better. Having a more tailored message to that audience is going to be more effective in the results you receive, and it's much more targeted if you do it that way. And then finally, landing page errors or sending to your recipients to the home page. Ideally, you want to send them to a landing page because it's going to be more targeted within the entire approach. But also, when they arrive on that landing page, you don't want there to be errors when they're there, so they can't fulfill the objective you're trying to get them to do.
Okay, so what about HTML? Well, HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. So it's basically the code that makes formatting and images visible on emails and web pages. So it's predominantly used for B2C, but also very, very effective for B2B if used in the correct manner. So you can promote offers, sales, products, services, webinars, events, newsletters, all under HTML. The messaging behind it can be informal and formal as well, depending on the certain messaging behind the email. So as you can see on the right-hand side, the majority of you would have seen this this email. This is taken from us, obviously promoting this webinar for today. And you can see at the very top, you've got a strong image that actually represents what the email is about. So it's about a webinar and it's about email, and the information within that image as well, with a little bit of text to show a bit more information required about what's going to happen within the webinar, and then a really strong focused call to action down at the bottom where it says register now, which takes you to that link, which is a form that you fill in for Zoho, and here you are today. So with HTML, does the image portray the core messaging of the email? And if it doesn't, you may want to rethink it and you may want to switch it up. So I've got a couple of examples for you. We've got two very, very different ones. We've got a company who's online retailer called Look Fantastic. They're so good with their HTML. They always have offers on. This particular one is on Carist's Paris, as you can all see. And the offer is save up to 20% and get a free travel size gift. I mean, who doesn't want to click on that to get 20% off, let's be honest. So of course the call to action is so strong, and they know that they're going to get the clicks, and therefore they're going to get the conversions, because people are going to buy their product whether people don't understand what Carist's is or not. The other one, TFL, is extremely different. It's showing that there's works going on some of the lines, particularly the Hammersmith and Fulham line. So it's actually saying check before you travel. So you can see it's very, very much more formal. It's apologizing for the disruption caused if you do have to travel through that line, and it's saying to plan ahead, and therefore the call to action is to actually go to the website and check all the different travel routes to make sure that you can actually be prepared when you travel. So again, it is an extremely narrow and focused call to action. So they're both very, very different, but very, very effective with their messaging and call to actions. It's also one thing to note for HTML. Sometimes you'll need to download pictures in an HTML. You probably have seen it before at the top. So if your email is more about the text and the messaging within the email, you might want to think about a plain text email instead. So with plain text, very, very, very common in B2B, as you may know. Predominantly, it's extremely effective. It can sometimes be more effective than HTML, actually, because it can take you straight to the point of your messaging of why you're getting in contact with that recipient. So even if you've got the format on a marketing tool, an email marketing tool, where you've got the option of using HTML and plain text, if you're a B2B customer or a B2B business, you might want to think about just using plain text over HTML if you're just introducing your services, for example. So you can still personalize your email, and sometimes it will look as if it's come in your inbox rather than from an email marketing tool. So we've all had those emails, let's be honest, from people that we don't know. They somehow know our names, they know our company, our role, they know the industry that we're in, and the messaging is so relevant to us that we somehow want to click and look at the email, and then maybe click on the call to action as well. But you'll also find that these emails aren't just directed just to us. There's an entire database that this particular sender has that have got similar recipients to us. So you can see that this is extremely targeted to a pool of data, and therefore it's really effective just using plain text. So you'll see welcome emails, like I said, introductory of services, and actually it's really common to see blogs, case studies, testimonials being used as almost like a softer call to action, so that it gets the recipient actually looking at going, okay, well, what is it that they do? Let me find out a bit more about it. So I would recommend that if you are a B2B business, maybe think about plain text if you're doing an introductory over in HTML. But if it's HTML, then think about what it is that you're offering. And yeah, good luck, basically.
So Now I want to talk about how to create a nurture sequence that converts. So for effective email marketing, we believe implementing an approach with multiple touch points, addressing different stages of the buying cycle, so awareness of what you do, interest in it, consideration, purchase, and eventually retention, will help you nurture a database to a conversion. So we'll go through the following sequence on how you can achieve that. And this is generally showcased by 5 different types of emails. So I'm going to touch upon each of those. Your first email is likely to be an introduction to the product or service. So with this email, we suggest you lead with an attractive or powerful intro about a strong weakness or pain point that the audience might have. So say you're trying to promote your email automation tool, you might want to use that as the solution and bring in this weakness within this intro. So you might say something like, did you know that 85% of businesses don't follow up on leads, and that results in a loss of 30% additional revenue? So you're hooking them in with this strong weakness that they might also be sort of suffering. And then the following paragraphs would allude to the answer of your solution. So it sort of is quite soft at first, and you finish with a well-qualified solution and call to action to value add. And when I say a well-qualified solution, what I mean by that is you provide credibility on your experience or qualifications. So that could be the business one. So you've been working in the industry for 10 years and you've increased your customer automation and reduced their loss of additional revenue by X amount. And when you're signing off this email, always make sure it's polite, a warm sign off, and write the job title of the person who it's going to be from underneath it. And a little tip here is to actually tweak that job title to align with the rest of the messaging and what you're trying to achieve, and add reassurance that actually you do know what you're doing and you are the right person to be speaking to. So then we'd say maybe wait 7 days or so before you send the next email, because this is a process and it will be nurtured over a period of time. So you want to really cement your awareness of your business and what you can provide within that time. So the next email would be a social proof email. And again, so you remember to sort of reintroduce who you are. And in this email, you're going to be giving them social proof of how it works. So a case study, a testimonial, or a blog post. You're giving them a reason that validates why you're speaking to them. So if you have a segment of data, ideally you want, say, that case study that you're showcasing to also be, within the same industry that you're targeting. The more sort of relevant it is for that audience, the more it's going to resonate with them. And don't be afraid at this stage to give detail on what you're saying works. Be really specific with those results. Give them a reason sort of to push that recipient to act. The gains email is a sort of more hard-hitting email. So the purpose of this one is to focus on the gains your user can expect from performing the call to action that your email is going to promote. So it's going to partly serve as a reminder, so reiterate that strong weakness or pain point, but you can really start putting in the calls to actions a bit earlier and really be a bit more sort of forceful in what your point is and what you're trying to achieve. The next email is around fear. So this is when you're flipping the messaging on its head a bit and highlighting the issues that the recipient might have if they don't address the problems that your product or service is trying to solve. So you're kind of playing on FOMO here. So if you're not aware, FOMO is fear of missing out. So you might have things like, already 35% of businesses in your industry have adopted this method. You should too. And then it gives them a sort of, oh, well, I know what the benefits are and everyone else is doing it. I should also have this sort of mentality to do it as well. And finally, your last email will be around logic. So why wouldn't you? And this is where you can consolidate and present all of the components of the previous emails in one place. So add in your intro You can be more to the point as to what that is and what you're trying to achieve. Get their attention. So here, put the benefits. This is really important. People want to know how any solution or product is going to benefit them, but be concise. You don't need to go on about it. Hopefully they've seen one of the others. Then you've got your action. So that could be sign up for a demo, purchase a product, fill in a form. Make sure that's quite high up within that email. Then reiterate what that solution is. Then give your social proof again. And finally, another action or sign off. Don't be afraid of repetition within this process, because on average it takes about 5 emails to expose what you're trying to achieve, and it's very unlikely that someone has seen all 5 of those emails. So hopefully they've seen a few and it gives them a strong enough reason to click through to become a conversion for you. But it's good to repeat and reiterate some of that messaging.
Cool. So the benefits of email marketing. So I'm going to put up the results from the previous poll, and interestingly, more of you actually already use marketing automation, which is great to see. So for those who don't, let me just briefly go through it. So marketing automation is basically a software that automates your campaigns to help prioritize your marketing and make processes more streamlined. So it's really only relevant for businesses who have absolutely nailed the basics and have a budget, because it can be quite expensive. It works really effectively when you've got your nurture sequence sorted. But if you want to automate the process more, potentially separate the segmentation of your data, for example, more between active engagers and passive engagers. So, for example, those who have requested a demo or signed up to the form versus those not quite sure and not quite there yet, but may have shown an interest, like clicking a softer call to action, like a case study, or where they consume more content. So it's a great way to use when you have enough relevant content to target your audience at any point in their buying cycle. And then at least you know you're in a position to experiment with marketing automation. So there are loads of marketing automation solutions out there, but the most common examples are HubSpot, Salesforce, and MailChimp. So with HubSpot in particular, there are certain approaches, and one of them is if and then. So Lindsay's going to go through what if and then is now.
So you'll see a visualization of a workflow that can be implemented based on user actions on the right. This is based on the if then approach. So you've got in blue a positive action, in red is what the option is, do they do it or not, yes, no, and orange is the type of email that the recipient will receive based on their previous response. So here with an if and then approach, you need to sort of map out what email your data or segment will receive based on the behavior within that email sequence. It's a really great approach to sort of implement, because you can increase brand awareness, because recipients can get fed back into the automation loop if they don't go down the sort of yes route that you want them to, and then you remind them of who you are and again what you're trying to do. In marketing automation tools, based on an action a user takes, it can tag customers, so you have more details about what they might want, or what might be relevant for them, or where they are and what sort of interaction they've done. And this can help with segmentation and future email campaigns, because the more you know about your customer, the more tailored your messaging can be. As a result, this allows the sales team to become more efficient when they approach prospects. You can understand further where your audience is within the buying lifecycle, and also any sticking points they have. So your sales team can direct their efforts more sort of effectively, and the sort of messaging that might be relevant to the user at the time. And it helps with personalization for your prospects. So if you know they haven't converted and you know where they're falling, then you can nurture them into a conversion because you have more information about what might work and what hasn't worked previously. We've been employing email marketing techniques with many of our clients, and we've seen some really great results. So I just wanted to share with you a couple of examples, one B2C and one B2B, to give you an idea of the kind of results that you can achieve if you're employing these best practice techniques. So for the B2C example, this is for a retail company. In the past month or so, they've been getting conversion rates of sort of 60-65% on the regular, and it's resulted in a 120 to 160 increase in their sales figures year on year. So they've been doing really, really well. And that's been through lots of various offers, lots of different testing, what's working. But essentially, 2/3 of the people who click onto their email make a purchase. So it's really, really effective. And a B2B example is for a security company. Email marketing is their primary channel within an integrated campaign. But since we've been using these techniques with their email, their monthly leads have shot up by 600%. So again, really effective, really targeted, and we're just using the results we have so far to improve upon that and get better results moving forward. So when it is used effectively, it can be really good for your bottom line and your business revenue.
So to summarize then, email conversions are increasing since lockdown, as we can clearly see, and it is still one of the best forms of communication to this day. Marketing isn't a science. You could have literally the same strong subject line, a punchy to the point body, a focused call to action, and it works brilliantly one day, but then the next it fails. But this is absolutely fine. You've just got to make sure that you're testing and testing again before you send, because it could depend on anything. So don't be worried if it does fail and you have tested. You've just got to keep testing them prior to sending. Make sure that you create a nurture sequence that will help customers through the sales cycle at any point. And then once you've nailed that, give it a go, challenge yourself, and use a marketing automation tool out there. There are hundreds and thousands that would be of relevance to your business. So finally, we do have some time for some questions. I know that we had one question up there from Pauline. Would you recommend A/B testing even for a fairly small audience? And how telling would those test results be?
That's a really good question, Pauline. Ideally, you would want to be able to have a big enough sample so that your test results are going to be relevant and valid, because like you've mentioned, how telling would those test results be? If it's a really small sample, it's not necessarily the most reliable, because the fewer people you have to test, the more the less reliable they are, and the less sort of indicative of a wider group of people it would be. It might be worth testing a few small things and seeing if the results are coming in very much so one way or the other. But if it's not a big enough sample, then your testing sort of efforts might be minimized.
So another one is, where can I source GDPR compliant data from?
So there are lots of good data companies available. It would just be a case of doing a bit of research into who they are and what their policies are on how they source the data and how they're compliant. I would always recommend going to a few, getting some quotes. You can often ask for a sample of data so that you can understand a little bit about what they are willing to provide you, but also definitely read their policies and make sure that they are they fit with regulations and they work for your business.
Yeah, exactly. Another really good question here, actually. Would you recommend e-shots via the Outlook platform? So like email merge on Word, that sort of campaign?
That's a really good question. It can work from a sort of sending point of view, and how you look at that, and you get the responses back, which is really helpful. I think, generally speaking, I would be more tempted to go for an email marketing tool, because you tend to get much more in terms of analytics and being able to measure that performance and track it more effectively. It depends what your budgets are, but there are a lot of very cheap tools available as well. So even if you're not going for huge amounts of data, it can be a good way to better measure and track, and also test, because that's much more difficult to do via an email mail merge.
Yeah, agreed. I think for an email merger, it's great if you want it to look like it's come from your inbox. But if you want to send out like a mass campaign with loads of emails and loads of data, it's not as relevant. Actually, you can end up spamming inboxes, and therefore it will actually it won't send. So it's worth thinking about exactly what are you trying to achieve when it comes to sending that email, and would it be better using a marketing tool, particularly as Lindsay said, you will get all of the analytics, you'll get the click rates, the open rates, the conversion rates, and you'll be able to make those judgments because you'll be testing them from the results, and therefore you'll be improving your campaigns moving forward. So yeah, really good question there. Do you recommend email marketing as a standalone activity or as part of a wider campaign approach?
So typically, that's going to depend on your audience. I know I've spoken about audience quite a lot here, but whichever channels resonate with them is going to be the channels that we would recommend you use, because you don't want to put your effort into something that's not going to work for them. So, for example, you might have Google Ads as another option, but there's a sort of advertising budget associated with that. And if your users aren't going to be sort of searching for things that you want to show them, then that's a wasted channel. That said, for a lot of companies, having an integrated approach is a better and more effective way to reach your target audience on multiple touch points. And typically, having an integrated approach is better for most businesses. So that's going to depend on your audience as to what you would do for that one.
Another one, how to reduce your emails going to the spam folder of recipients seems to be the case often when using MailChimp Facility. That is a good one. Again, I think it goes back to the do's and the don'ts in our webinar slides. Make sure that you're not having these spammy subject lines. Even your call to action links. Sometimes inboxes can actually, any link, if they don't know the sender, it will immediately go into junk. So you want to make sure that if you are using HTML, that you've got a certain setup so that it does not go into junk folder. The email marketing tool that we use actually gives us almost like a verification to tell us whether it will go into junk or not before we actually can send it, and why it would go into junk, so we can then actually amend those before it does get sent out. So another thing to think about is if you're using HTML, perhaps try a plain text version. If you are doing links and call to actions that are to, for example, a website, because let's be honest, there's a lot of email phishing out there, so we don't want to click on links and then end up with a virus. So a lot of emails have got that sort of security software in place so that it doesn't happen, so that you can't click on a link. So think about the messaging of your email, think about how you're using the call to actions and the links within that, if that makes any sense. I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, no, I think that's all completely right. And also the other case, we tend to see if a lot of spam is going into spam, sorry, a lot of emails going into spam, it might be your data that's the issue, and it might be that it's not good data, and you probably want to invest or investigate in other data sets that are more reliable.
Yeah, exactly. And final question, we are about to launch a referral scheme using MailChimp. Would you recommend the same email sequence that you mentioned earlier?
So a referral scheme, so I'm taking that to be you're sending it to your customers who already know who you are and what you're doing. In that case, it probably isn't the best sequence or the most relevant, because you don't need to introduce the product or service in the same way. It would have a different focus. The email nurture sequence is more to nurture prospects. There are elements of it that can be taken and used with your customers, but if it's a referral scheme, I would be mapping out actually a slightly different sequence to be more relevant to that audience. I hope that answers your question. I have seen another one come in. What is the best email package, for example, Campaign Manager or MailChimp for a B2B print company? So again, email, that's quite a tricky question, because often it depends on personal preference. We've used both MailChimp and Campaign Manager here, and they're both intuitive to use. Like, many are much of a muchness, and it might actually ultimately come down to what are you trying to achieve, how often are you using it, price, and whether or not the email software you go for is going to satisfy the needs of what you're trying to do. So again, that is how far you are with your email marketing and how developed your process is.
And then finally, I think adding on to the mail merger question, we do notice emails like office at or admin at seem to get soft bounces on MailChimp. Do maybe personalized named emails tend to reach the audience better? 100%. If you think about it, the more personal you can be with your email, the more likely it's going to be opened and therefore be read, and therefore click into the call to action, whatever the call to action may be, even if the call to action is please respond. 100%. And again, that goes back to your data. If you can get good data that actually sends it to the relevant person within that role or that audience, you're going to get a better outcome than if you're just sending it to info at. So yes, 100%. Would you agree with that, Lindsay?
Yeah.
So I think that's all we've got time for today. Finally, we are doing our next webinar. We do these every month. Our next webinar is actually going to be on the 16th of September. I'm doing it as a broadcast. It's going to be on a guide to Google Analytics. So if you're looking at, once you've got your email campaign, now you want to think about, well, how do you actually use those analytics? I haven't got a clue where to go to. This is perfect for you. So I've got the link below, so you can register for it. We'll have more details on it. It's on it further on, as I think next week we'll probably have some more information on it, but you can still register in the meantime. And would you send slides? Yes, we always send slides to those who attend, so don't worry, you'll all get a copy of these. Whether they'll be today, I couldn't tell you, but hopefully in the next 24 hours we'll be sending them across to you via email. So yeah, keep an eye out, and thank you all so much for attending today. And if you have any further questions, you can email myself or Lindsay Dier. I'll put our emails down now. But mine is Tracy-Ann Lee at generateuk.co.uk, and Lindsay is lindsay.dier at generate. You can hear me typing clearly. .co.uk. And yeah, if you've got any further questions, please do drop us an email. We'd be happy to answer them. And thank you again.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.